It was a crisp, cloudless morning in New York City. The streets buzzed with the usual rhythm of ambition. But inside the glass-paneled auditorium of the Global Forum on Governance and Sustainable Development, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. World leaders, scholas, business giants, they had all gathered, not just to speak, but to shape the conversation around the future of developing nations. Among the keynote speakers was former U.S. President Bill Clinton, known for his charm and candor. Clinton stepped up to the podium with his signature ease, scanning the crowd before delivering his carefully crafted thoughts. And then, in the middle of a larger point about leadership in the Global South, he made a turn that no one expected. With a slight grin and a raised brow, he gestured to the screen behind him. A photo of Ibrahim Traoré, the young president of Burkina Faso, appeared, clad in a plain military uniform. Standing tall, but humble, it was a stark contrast to the designer suits filling the room. "Now look at this young leader," Clinton began, adjusting his glasses with a wry smile. "He's admired for turning down foreign aid, preaching self-reliance. And sure, that sounds noble. But let's be real. How's a country like Burkina Faso going to prosper without Western support? Sounds more like youthful idealism than a real plan." There were chuckles, nervous ones, some heads turned, a few jaws tightened. Clinton, sensing the shift, but leaning in anyway, continued, "Don't get me wrong. I admire the energy. But fragile economies, failing infrastructure, idealism doesn't put food on the table." His words weren't shouted. They were measured, but they carried weight. And within minutes, the moment was clipped and posted online. The video spread like wildfire across social media. Pundits called it straight talk. Others called it patronizing. But somewhere across the ocean, in a modest office within the presidential palace in Ouagadougou, President Ibrahim Traoré was watching it all unfold. No lavish entourage, no spin team crafting a rebuttal. He sat still, his face composed. Around him, his advisors shifted uncomfortably. One aide turned to him. "I ready to speak," but Traoré raised a hand, signaling silence. He rewound the video, watched it again. Then finally, in a voice that was both calm and firm, he said, "This gentleman, he doesn't understand the meaning of dignity. But perhaps it is our duty to help him learn." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't call for outrage. He called for action. And in that moment, without fury, without drama, Ibrahim Traoré made a decision that would ripple far beyond Burkina Faso. A decision that would turn a moment of condescension into a movement of global respect. Because sometimes, the most powerful response is delivered with quiet strength. In the capital city of Ouagadougou, the air was thick with heat and something else, tension. President Ibrahim Traoré sat quietly in a modest office. A far cry from the grandeur many might imagine of a head of state. No polished oak desk, no extravagant backdrops, just a plain screen, a few aides, and the now viral clip of Bill Clinton's comment playing on loop. The room was still. No one dared to speak first. On the screen, Clinton's words echoed again. "Idealism doesn't put food on the table." Some aides looked uneasy. Others were visibly frustrated. They wanted a statement, a rebuttal, a press release with bold headlines. But Traoré wasn't like other leaders. He didn't believe in theatrics. He believed in meaning. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes fixed on the screen, not with anger, but with something deeper, reflection. Then, without turning away, he spoke. "This gentleman," he said slowly, "does not understand the meaning of dignity." He let that hang in the air, heavy but controlled. "But perhaps," he continued, now turning toward his team, "it is our responsibility to show him." There was no resentment in his tone, only resolve. The room came alive. Advisors nodded. Someone reached for a notebook. A plan was forming, not just a response, but a message, not just for Clinton, not just for the West, but for every young African, every farmer, every student, every doubter, whoever believed they were too small to shape their future. Traoré knew this wasn't about one man's words. It was about centuries of assumptions, about reclaiming the right to write one's own story. So, he called for a press conference. International media would be present. Local journalists too. No teleprompter. No rehearsed applause. Just the truth. As preparations unfolded, Traoré remained grounded. That night, instead of drafting lines for the cameras, he visited a local training center on the edge of the city. It was a place where young men and women learned to build solar panels from scrap. One of the trainees, barely 19, greeted him with a handshake stained by grease and ambition. "Will you watch us work, Mr. President?" the boy asked. Traoré smiled. "No," he said gently. "I came to learn," and learn he did, about invention, resilience, and the quiet genius that never makes headlines. When he left, he paused at the gate, looked back at the lit-up courtyard, where the students were still tinkering under lamps powered by their own hands, and said to his security detail, "Tomorrow, we speak not just for Burkina Faso. We speak for every voice that's been overlooked, and every dream that's been doubted." And so, as dawn approached, the world had no idea that one of the most powerful messages of modern leadership wasn't going to be shouted from a podium. It was going to be delivered with steady eyes, a grounded heart, and a truth the world couldn't ignore. The following afternoon, the courtyard outside the presidential press hall in Ouagadougou was packed, rows of chairs filled with international journalists, government officials, community leaders, even students, sat under the unrelenting West African sun. No one knew exactly what President Ibrahim Traoré would say, but everyone felt something was coming. There were no flashy banners, no grand performance, just a single screen behind the podium and the soft hum of cameras clicking into place. Then, without fanfare, Traoré walked to the microphone. No suit, no military medals. Just a simple traditional tunic and the same calm presence that had come to define him. He didn't greet the press like a politician. He looked at them like a teacher might look at a classroom on the first day of a hard lesson. "Yesterday," he began, pointing to the screen behind him, "a former president of the United States questioned our ability to prosper without Western support." A clip of Clinton's now infamous quote played silently, his smirk, his tone, his youthful idealism comment. Then the screen went black. The crowd shifted. Some were surprised he brought it up at all. Others braced for a defensive rant. But that wasn't what came next. You know what Traoré said? His voice steady, but strong. "He's right about one thing. Idealism alone doesn't feed a nation. a pause? But neither does pity build progress. And handouts do not create dignity. Murmurs rippled across the crowd. In this moment, he continued, we don't just respond with words, we respond with action. And today, I am proud to announce a national initiative we call Dignity Through Self-Reliance. He stepped aside, revealing a slide of the program behind him: community training hubs, agricultural innovation centers, youth-led tech cooperatives. This is not charity. This is not diplomacy. This is commitment. He said, commitment to our people, to our soil, to our right to build a future with our own hands. He leaned closer to the microphone, and his voice, though quiet, carried like thunder. We do not reject partnership, but we will no longer wait for permission to believe in ourselves. The applause was hesitant at first, then loud, then thunderous. Journalists scrambled to capture his every word, and on social media, hashtags began to trend within minutes. Number, your dignity. Number, self-sufficiency. Traore speaks. But Traore didn't linger for praise. As the cameras flashed, he stepped down from the podium, nodded humbly, and disappeared behind the curtain, already focused on the real work ahead. That day, Burkina Faso didn't just gain a new policy, it gained a new voice. And for millions around the world, watching from screens in classrooms, villages, and city apartments, that voice whispered a message they'd long waited to hear. You are not less. You are enough. And your future is yours to build. The press conference had ended, but the real story was just beginning. Within hours, clips of Ibrahim Traore's speech flooded social media. It wasn't just African Twitter lighting up. It was global. From Nairobi to New York. From Paris to Port-au-Prince. People were sharing the words of a leader who didn't raise his voice, but raised a standard. Dignity through self-reliance. It wasn't just a slogan. It became a movement. Hashtags like Traore Response, Number, Your Dignity, and Number, Africa can trended across platforms. Comment sections filled with messages of support, admiration, and something rare in international politics, hope. In Burkina Faso, the energy was electric. Ordinary citizens, farmers, teachers, students began sharing their own stories. A woman named Aissatou posted a photo of her handmade soap line with the caption, "No aid, just effort." A young boy named Soumaila filmed a short video repairing an old radio, saying, "If we can fix this, we can fix our future." Radio stations replayed the speech hourly. Schools discussed it during morning assemblies. It became more than politics. It became personal. But it didn't stop at the borders. In Ghana, a group of university students organized a live-stream panel titled African Solutions for African Challenges. In Nigeria, a youth-led campaign called Value Your People launched to raise funds for local farmers and small rural businesses. In Senegal, women's cooperatives began offering free mentorship to young girls in engineering and agriculture. For the first time in a long time, an African leader's words weren't just reactive, they were contagious. They spread not because they were loud, but because they were real. Meanwhile, international media picked up the wave. The New York Times ran the headline, "Burkina Faso, President turns criticism into global movement." The BBC called it one of the most poised and visionary responses of the decade. Even in France, editorialists, some of whom had long been critical, described Traoré's speech as a masterclass in modern diplomacy. But perhaps the most unexpected reaction came from the United States. Bill Clinton, the man whose words had sparked the storm, found himself at the center of a very different conversation. While some of his supporters defended his original remarks as practical realism, many began urging him to respond. And respond, he did. In a carefully worded tweet, Clinton wrote, "Leadership isn't about never being challenged. It's about being willing to grow when you are. I look forward to learning more from President Traoré and the people of Burkina Faso." It wasn't an apology, but it was a start. Behind closed doors, Clinton's team began reaching out. A letter was drafted, an invitation to speak man to man. Leader to leader was sent, and somewhere in a quiet room in Ouagadougou, Ibrahim Traoré read that letter. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply nodded. Because he hadn't been seeking validation. He had been seeking change. And the world was finally listening. The screen flickered. A digital connection buzzed to life. And for the first time, two leaders from two very different worlds appeared face to face, not across a debate stage or through headlines, but through a quiet video call that history wasn't prepared for. On one side sat Bill Clinton, former President of the United States. In a well-lit office, lined with books and framed memorabilia, on the other side, Ibrahim Traoré, seated in a modest government room in Ouagadougou, wearing the same traditional attire he had worn at his press conference, a symbol of identity, not image. The tension wasn't heavy. In fact, it felt more human than political. Traoré was the first to speak. "Mr. President," he said with a calm, measured tone. "Your words stirred something deeper than disagreement. They reminded us of the importance of being misunderstood and still choosing to build." Clinton nodded, quietly listening. Traoré continued. "When you questioned our path, it gave us a reason to define it more clearly. And so, I thank you, not for the criticism, but for the chance to respond with action." There was a pause. Then Clinton leaned forward. Sincerity, replacing his signature charm. "Mr. President," he replied, "I didn't expect that my remarks would become anything more than a soundbite. But you turned it into something that humbled me. And truthfully, inspired me." He looked directly into the camera. His voice lower, more grounded. "This is an honor I never imagined I'd have. If my words, careless or not, pushed something good forward, then maybe they served a purpose after all." The conversation shifted. It wasn't just about speeches anymore. It became a discussion about solar innovation, youth empowerment, agricultural sustainability, and what it truly meant to lead without dependency. Traoré shared blueprints from the Dignity Through Self-Reliance initiative. Clinton, in return, I spoke of how grassroots innovation could teach even the most advanced systems something new. And then came a moment that surprised everyone. Clinton made a commitment. "I'd like to send a team of development experts to Burkina Faso," he said. "Not to teach, to learn, to see how your people are building from the ground up. And when they return, we'll support a pilot project focused on renewable energy in rural areas led by locals. Informed by your model." Traoré didn't blink. He simply nodded with quiet respect. "Welcome," he said. "Our doors and our minds are open." The call ended not with applause, but with something more lasting: understanding. News outlets around the world rushed to cover the story. But they didn't just report on an agreement. They captured something rare. Two leaders who put aside pride, politics, and projection for the sake of progress. And across continents, viewers took away one simple truth. Sometimes, it's not the loudest voice that leads. Sometimes, it's the one that listens and then chooses to act. Back in the United States, the ripple effect of that video call hadn't just faded, it was growing stronger. A few days later, Bill Clinton appeared on a popular evening news program. He looked different, not disheveled, not defeated, just thoughtful. The host, expecting another polished answer, leaned in. "Mr. President," she asked, "do you regret what you said about President Traoré?" Clinton exhaled slowly. Then, with surprising humility, he answered, "I made a mistake." He said, "Plain and simple. I underestimated a leader who's doing something many in the developed world still struggle to do. He's building a future by believing in his people." There was no applause, just a rare silence. The kind that comes when truth interrupts routine. Clinton's words made headlines again. But this time, they didn't stir outrage, they sparked reflection. Commentators across networks began revisiting the original incident, not to rehash the drama, but to spotlight the dignity of the response. Op-eds shifted tone. Pundits called it a case study in how to turn tension into transformation. Back in Burkina Faso, Traoré remained unfazed by the media waves. His focus was on the ground. He visited a small rural village where the Dignity Through Self-Reliance initiative had already taken root. There, he met a woman named Fatou, soft-spoken, firm-handed, who had recently completed training in solar-powered irrigation systems. Before the program, she explained, she could barely provide for her children. Now, she wasn't just sustaining her family, she was teaching other women to do the same. As she held up a homemade power tool, she looked him in the eye and said, "We didn't just survive. We started building." The cameras caught the moment. But what mattered most wasn't the photo, it was the impact. Fatou's story went viral. And soon, stories like hers were emerging across West Africa. Women and men posting short clips, showcasing community gardens, solar pumps. 3D printed farming tools. Young people proudly tagged their videos with hashtags like #Africa for the world and #Respect Dignity. Meanwhile, Clinton followed through. He dispatched a team of development experts, not with clipboards and lectures, but with open notebooks and listening ears. Their job wasn't to instruct, it was to observe. And what they found was humbling local engineers repurposing discarded tech for village use. Farmers integrating traditional wisdom with modern sustainability models. Teenagers launching micro-businesses from roadside stalls, powered by the sun. Clinton, receiving the reports, shook his head in wonder. They're doing what we talk about in conferences, and they're doing it with scraps and grit. He went a step further, announcing a foundation-backed pilot program to support renewable energy expansion in rural African communities, modeled after what he had witnessed in Burkina Faso. At a press briefing, he said, "This isn't charity. This is learning, and maybe, just maybe, it's time we stopped talking about lifting others up and started listening to how they're already standing." And just like that, what began as a misunderstanding became a movement, not of aid, not of rescue, but of respect and mutual growth. It was a warm afternoon in downtown Ouagadougou. Hundreds had gathered in the heart of the city, not for a concert, not for a protest, but for something much quieter and far more powerful, a celebration. The plaza was simple. No red carpets, no national banners, just the people, farmers, teachers, entrepreneurs. Mothers gathered shoulder to shoulder with international guests, local journalists, and children buzzing with excitement. At the center stood a modest stage, and when President Ibrahim Traoré stepped onto it, the crowd didn't erupt. They rose in silence out of respect. He wasn't wearing a suit, no teleprompter, no political theater, just his traditional tunic, a steady gaze, and words that came straight from the heart. Today, he began, we're not here to celebrate statistics. We're not here to show off progress charts or investment graphs. He paused. We're here to honor hands. The hands that tilled this land, that raised homes, that taught children, that built dignity. One act at a time. The crowd remained still, hanging on to every word. And when I first spoke with President Clinton, he continued. He asked me, what's the difference between idealism and practicality? He smiled softly. Today, I think we've shown him. They can walk together. Applause followed, not thunderous, but real, raw, proud. Then something unexpected happened. From within the crowd, a young girl, no more than 8, stepped forward. Holding a small wooden box, she climbed the steps with the help of a nearby journalist, walked up to Traoré, and offered him the gift with both hands. Inside the box was a handmade wooden sculpture, 2 human figures holding hands. Engraved at the base were the words, "Kindness unites worlds." Traoré didn't speak. He didn't need to. He held the sculpture gently, bowed his head slightly, and tucked it close to his chest. That gesture would be replayed across news networks and social media platforms for days. But what happened next was what truly mattered. As the event came to a close, Traoré stepped off the stage and approached a small family standing near the edge of the crowd. Among them was a young girl clutching a doll made of old cloth and buttons. Her name was Aisha. Her family had been one of the first to benefit from the Self-Reliance Initiative. They now had electricity, clean water, and school access. Traoré knelt beside her and asked, "How are you adjusting to your new life?" The girl looked up shyly, then smiled. "I'm learning at school." "Mr. President," she said softly, "and now I can dream." That was it. No speech could match that. No policy could outshine that truth. Because in that moment, it was clear the real success wasn't in political praise or international partnerships. It was in the dreams of a child who now believed tomorrow belonged to her. And sometimes, that's all the proof a leader ever needs. The days that followed were quiet but not empty. In homes, classrooms, and community centers across Burkina Faso, something had changed. Not just policies, not just programs, but something deeper. The way people stood, the way they spoke, the way they believed again in what was possible. President Ibrahim Traoré didn't take a victory lap. He returned to work, quietly, consistently, visiting villages, listening to stories, checking on irrigation systems, walking the dusty paths alongside farmers and teachers, not as a commander-in-chief, but as a neighbor, Meanwhile, the Dignity Through Self-Reliance initiative had taken on a life of its own. No longer just a national project. It became a blueprint. In neighboring countries, grassroots groups began forming their own variations centered on local solutions, sustainable development, and cultural pride. In Kenya, they called it Roots of Strength. In Togo, it became Women for Water. Across the continent, ideas were being planted like seeds, and they were growing fast. In the United States, Bill Clinton watched the updates from afar, and with each report, each headline, each photograph of a child holding a solar-powered lantern or a woman leading a farming collective, he saw something he hadn't expected to see: humility. True innovation wasn't flashy. It didn't always come with investors or big press conferences. Sometimes, it came in the form of rags turned into dolls, scraps turned into machines, pride turned into action. So, he made good on his promise. Through his foundation, Clinton launched a renewable energy partnership with a special focus on rural African communities, beginning in Burkina Faso. But this time, the model wasn't imported. It was reversed. The experts weren't there to build. They were there to learn. We're not exporting help, Clinton told the press. We're importing wisdom. And just like that, the narrative shifted from charity to collaboration, from lecture to listening. Back in Ouagadougou, a final ceremony was held not to mark an end, but a beginning. Traoré stood before a new generation of students, community builders, and innovators. They weren't wearing caps and gowns. They wore work boots, threadbare scarves, sun-kissed smiles. He spoke simply. We do not need saving, he said. We need respect. The crowd fell silent, and we do not need permission to rise. We are already standing. At the edge of the crowd, a foreign reporter scribbled something in her notebook. Later, her article would begin with the line, "Today, in Burkina Faso, I didn't just witness a policy. I witnessed a people remembering who they are." As the sun set on the capital, casting long golden shadows across the streets, Ibrahim Traoré held the small wooden sculpture he had been gifted. Kindness unites worlds. And in that moment, he understood what true leadership looked like. Not in applause, not in headlines, but in the quiet ripple of dignity echoing across the world.